Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are, welcome to SHOWstudio and our first session looking at the Italian design shows which have started today, the menswear design shows, of course. And I would like the panel to introduce themselves as I look at them and we start.
Tom Hingston, I'm a graphic designer and art director.
Jack Tobin, I was previously a fashion designer in Italy and London, and now I head up Selfridges Bespoke.
I'm Carlo Brandelli and I'm a designer.
I'm Hywel Davies, fashion writer and lecturer at Central St Martin's.
So, thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming in. We are looking this morning particularly at the Jil Sander menswear show, which is taking place, and we're going to look at some of the pictures now. And then we want to broaden it a bit and talk about what we feel is the position of Italian fashion now, and particularly men's Italian fashion, because there are certain people who feel that it's losing its way. I don't know whether the panel will feel that, but we'll learn that as we go along. So let's begin by looking at some of the pictures. Here we go.
Is that that's the first look?
I guess it is,
Yeah.
yes.
That's a coat. Yeah, I suppose it's a coat for winter.
Yes. Red, strong, bold colour. Very much. There's a lot of this orangey red.
Oh yeah, I've
coming
seen
through.
that in the collections. A lot of
Yes,
rust
yes.
and red has been picked up almost across all of them.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's quite interesting, this is only Jil Sander's second collection, so there's obviously a lot of attention and people wondering, where she's going to take it, if it's going to be different from what Raf Simons was doing before.
Yeah.
Since she came back and was doing it herself.
Yes.
She did. Last season was her first
This was
season
her
back,
first,
wasn't it?
first
Yeah.
collection, yeah. But it must be sort of thought about that it's pretty brave of her to.
That's quite similar to McQueen in a sense. It's very long proportion, isn't it? And a heavy,
Yes.
bold pinstripe.
I don't know if that silhouette is intentional, but it's very boxy and very wide.
Is that a
If I'm
criticism
talking
or-
specifically about cut,
Yeah, what
well,
do you
just
feel?
through the waist. I mean, there's so much fabric there. We'll get a better idea as we flick through, and if that boxy shape is
Can we go back?
going to be
Yes.
consistent.
This is interesting. We had some of this, I think, rather crude differentiation between black and white, negative, positive in London. Do you think that this might be something which becomes a motif for the next season? Do you
I
think
hope
it's got
not.
any mileage?
I think
How
it
would
looks
you
a
be
bit
able to sell
dated.
it, Jack? How would you be able to sell it?
What it's making me think, it looks quite Pierre Cardin, I think, actually.
Mhm.
Does,
doesn't it?
Yes.
It's also a very kind of East look as well. It's the East London kind of guy, isn't it?
Yeah.
The trouser is actually unusually, it looks quite classic. Rather, it's not a very narrow trouser, or I would consider a very narrow trouser with that top.
Is this sleeveless theme something that sneaked into the London looks this year as well?
Yes,
Autumn,
with
winter.
J.W. Anderson, in fact. He did sort of little
Yeah.
sleeveless. And actually that was a bit sort of Pierre Cardin when I think,
Yeah. I just,
little
again,
minis and everything.
in my mind, fundamentally, autumn, winter, sleeveless top, there's really no sense there.
Well,
From
I
a
don't
very
think,
basic
yeah, it's a good point,
viewpoint.
Carlo, but I think that actually designers have risen above seasons. They don't care about seasons because few of us actually live a totally seasonal life. You go to Hong Kong to work, or you go to Rio for pleasure, or whatever it happens to be. You don't need sort of the strong
of course.
differentiation. I
Everything's
think-
air conditioned, climates
Yes.
are controlled. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, so we have multifunctioning wardrobes
Completely.
and of all weights, really, from cashmere to heavy tweed or whatever. Let's go on looking.
But Jill's fundamentally always been essentially a collection based around tailoring and slightly
Yes.
formal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, to me, to see sleeveless designs for somebody like Jil Sander, actually, I think it's quite a departure.
But what's quite interesting, she did before she came back to do her own label again. She was at Uniqlo for 3 years, I think, wasn't she?
Yeah.
So the collection is definitely youthful, isn't it?
It is. I mean, what's the demographic here? 25 to 35? Because it used to, I remember...
Being much older.
Yeah, when she came onto
I
the
think
scene.
much younger, actually.
Yeah, even less, yeah.
I think teens,
Right.
late teens.
Whereas years ago, the price dictated that whoever bought her collection
Yeah.
was 28 to 40.
Absolutely.
So again, you know, what
What do
sort
you
of
think of this
comments
look?
are we making?
This looks to me incredibly feminine. It's
Is it denim? Can anyone see that?
Is it the wall?
Yeah, that's the thing. You can't really
no,
get a sense of the fabrics, can you? Really?
One doesn't know. Is that some sort of little bit of a fur collar or?
Yeah,
Or
it looks
what?
like a shearling or something like that.
Is it homage to a little Chanel jacket, do you think, Colin?
No, I think it's going right back to, I guess, when she was young, which was the 40s and the 50s. I may be being unkind to the lady. I don't know how old she actually is, but it seems to me I've seen an awful lot of coats like that when I was very, very young.
Again, you know, it's, well, I suppose in the 40s and 50s, I think, if I talk as an Italian, those tailored jackets used to be known as bum freezers.
Yes, they did.
You remember?
Absolutely, they
Yeah,
did.
remember that.
Not only in Italy, but everywhere,
Yeah.
really.
And again, you know,
Yes.
short jacket for winter. I've now seen sleeveless tops. I've seen short jackets. Warmth is obviously not a preoccupation.
No, it's
and
not.
if we talk about menswear being functional first, form and function, before you look at the design, I mean, this is a great example of what we were talking about off camera earlier.
Yes.
But it was quite interesting what you were saying about it being very young. But do you think there is a pressure that for the presentation for the catwalk show that the models have to be young, and the looks have to be young?
No, Comme des Garçons, I think, has been consistently wonderful for many years, and she's always used models.
Different ages models.
Completely, and older models. I mean, I can remember I was asked to model in one of her shows, mid-90s. It was the show, actually, Alexander McQueen modelled in, and lots of other people at the time. And I think the average age was maybe 30, 35, and, you know, she uses men of 50, 60. I don't think it's got anything to do with it. Pressure from who, again?
Press or consumers?
But do you want the models to look young? Do the consumers
I
want
think
to?
the person who really started this was Miuccia Prada. She
With very
started
young
having
models.
incredibly young models.
For men's, Colin.
For men's. And she was going against the sort of Dolce Gabbana thing where there were great big muscled men, you know, tough guys who'd spent virtually all of their lives in a gym since they were about 10 and certainly were right for their clothes at this time. And Miuccia was quite extraordinary. She just went completely the opposite way, which of course is what she always does. I sometimes think she sits there and thinks, what are the rest going to do? And then thinks, what is the diametric opposite of that? And she does it, you know? But I think she was the person who started the really young, twig-like model. And I remember writing at the time, this is ludicrous because people who are showing these clothes are looking great, they were looking lovely, they're not going to be able to buy them. Now I think it's different because I think there are an awful lot of young people who make a lot of money and they can afford to buy clothes. Anyhow, let's go on.
Again, the collar is a feature. That boxy, more of a boxy feel does seem to be a feature,
Yes.
as opposed to it just being cut incorrectly, as I was vaguely suggesting at the beginning. Again, these looks that have been around for 10, 15, maybe 20 seasons, very wide, broad shoe, and with the trousers slightly floating on top of it, and then that boxy top. It's not, I mean, when I was designing menswear, the idea was always to elongate the silhouette and make men look as elegant as possible. And anything that's boxy on the top, then a short trouser and a wide shoe,
Cuts the body.
is completely, it doesn't make any sense. But
True.
designers seem to do it a lot. Tom Brown, 8-9 years ago, probably
Started
for the
it,
first
yeah.
time.
Yes,
But he does, when the trouser's cropped, it looks like it's purposefully cropped. This looks somewhere in between. It doesn't look cropped, or it just looks like a trouser that's slightly too short. It's not as the season before she did a cropped trouser that was
It
higher.
was
than
actually
that.
cropped.
Yeah.
Go further, Jack. What are you saying?
The trousers don't fit.
Well,
The
again,
models
Tom,
are too tall.
Tom, what are you feeling? Could you imagine yourself buying anything from this collection?
Well, so far I'm unsure, and I'm actually a big Jil Sander fan. As a man, I buy a lot of Jil Sander.
You do?
I do.
Right.
Yeah. But I'm kind of, interesting what Carlo was saying. That certainly what Raf did was explore a more kind of elongated silhouette. It was much narrower, much slimmer, a much more sort of defined cut, and we're not really seeing that here. It is.
No.
For me, it's more unflattering. I wouldn't wear something that's more boxy, and that's partly because I'm not particularly tall male. So something like that on me would look kind of ridiculous, to be honest.
Yeah.
So are we saying this is perhaps not a particularly commercial?
I think parts of it are
Do you
quite
know what?
commercial.
Yeah, it's so hard sometimes because you're looking at these looks. She's the kind of designer particularly that if we were looking at the pieces in the showroom, I reckon suddenly it would be a really commercial collection with really wearable, desirable pieces, and you'd be feeling the fabrications and looking at the construct. But just the styling is making it not look so great, possibly. I think, but it is commercial, definitely.
I think the thing about it, it's not particularly exciting, or because when you would see Raf Simons do Jil Sander, it would feel a lot more aggressive and a lot more exciting.
But isn't this the real problem with menswear, the dichotomy? Is it meant to be exciting? Do men want excitement, or do they want product? It seems to me, this is the thing that I was thinking all the time we were looking at London fashion last week. You know, no one quite seems to know whether we want bog standard things like that, which anyone could wear and possibly feel happy in, one doesn't know, or do we want something which makes people think, wow, there's an idea here. See, we have not seen a new idea.
No, I mean, essentially with menswear, and if we're talking about, if we stick to this demographic of 25 to 45-year-old man, creative sector, working in a city that would probably be the Jil Sander classic customer.
Yeah.
You want form and function. You want it to work. There is a feeling over the last 9-10 years that you want things to be very light. You want that silhouette, a great cut, but you want to eliminate all that weight. And you want it to be multi-purpose and multi-use. So I think fundamentally, you sit down to design a collection, those things have to be there, especially from somebody like Jil. I mean, a lot of designers, you wait to see their show and you sort of understand the DNA that will come out straight away. You know what you're going to get from Jil Sander or any of these other designers. But I think she's moved away a little bit here from what I would have expected to see, or what I did see for many seasons. Monochromatic, grey, white shirt. It's very, very simple. Minimalism,
The
modernism.
purity of
Purity's gone.
There's
It's
no
like they're
purity
searching.
here.
She's searching now, and she's playing around with a few silhouettes.
I mean, would it be churlish of me to say that perhaps she's an older woman who is trying to capture the zeitgeist of the young?
I think it's
And I
accurate
think
of you to say that.
I think it's very difficult to do that.
How old
John,
is she?
you buy her clothes.
She's 70, I think, actually.
70.
She's
Yeah.
60,
Is she that
69.
old?
late 60s.
Really?
69. Yeah,
You
yeah.
see, that it's a big ask.
And she's a
for
woman
her
doing
to-
menswear.
for her to slot into to menswear. But you say you bought
I
Jil
have
Sander
done,
in the past.
yeah.
Are you thinking, oh, I'm going to buy that? Is there anything here that you thought, yeah, I wouldn't mind that?
So far, no. I mean, I think it's interesting what you're the discussion that you're having around her, you know, trying to sort of experiment and do things that might appeal to a younger audience. I mean, you know, it's funny, isn't it? Because following on from Raf, I mean, what Raf did to that label was amazing. You know, he actually made it into something else, and actually now, even though it obviously originally it was hers, but going back to it, it's actually quite a tough act for her to follow, I think.
Yes. Of course, I
she
should know
tries
this,
to
but
change what's
I don't
going
know
on.
this, but presumably she has a young designer or a design team.
You would think so.
One would
wouldn't you?
imagine.
There'll be a vast
One would
team now.
imagine. Because, you know, age is no drawback today. I mean, if we think of the grand ones, the Armanis, the Lagerfelds, the Ralph Laurens, I mean, these men, cumulatively, very quickly, their ages would add up to 1,000 years. You know, if you thought of all the ones who are certainly over 60. You know, I don't know, how old would Dolce & Gabbana be? I mean, they're not so young now, are they?
Mid-50s. Probably
Late
mid-50s
50s,
again.
mid-50s.
Yeah. Again, if you look at this coat here, just getting back to those shots, if I talk about from a technical standpoint of
Yeah.
my time in Savile Row, the coat, I mean, a longish coat for a man like this would probably be just below the knee. This is almost the top of his ankle. So you're sitting down from a practical point of view. A lot of that fabric's going to get in your way. So this must be an aesthetic visual decision from the design. Let's make it super long to make a conscious effort to show off a super long silhouette. But from a practical point of view, I know you sit down in that coat, there's going to be all this fabric around you.
Yeah.
So again, fundamentally, menswear and designers like Jil Sander, who perhaps maybe with Raf have solidified the essence of modernism, could we say, or minimalism over 10
the latter.
years. Yeah, if you name those 3 or 4 modern minimalist designers that really have taken everything away from design, just produced an essence. I mean, Jil Sander would be in there, absolutely.
Absolutely.
You couldn't say that she wasn't.
Jack, on this point, is with a show for you as a buyer, is what you see what you get, or can you go to them and say, we want this coat, but we want it X number of centimetres shorter?
Not really in that sense.
No?
Maybe in
So
colour
you do
and
buy it
fabrication. Yeah.
yes.
Not when it changes the cut or, you know, in terms
The
of altering it
proportion.
like that. But I'm confused. What I'm getting most from the show is I'm quite confused about the customer, because I'm hearing your point about saying that you thought it was quite young. But I mean, I'm looking at a coat like that and thinking that that's going to retail for about possibly 2,500 to 3,500, and if it's as young as you're saying, I mean, what teenager is going to have that level of money to buy a very minimal coat anyway?
Yes. Paradoxically, I think this isn't young. I mean, I can imagine.
Yeah, now it's
you know,
changing.
someone of my age, if I was slim, could wear that.
Maybe it's purposeful throughout the show. Maybe she hasn't got one particular man in mind, because it has changed significantly. I mean, those sleeveless pieces, they're going to obviously retail a lot less, and then somebody could buy into that. you know.
Right. Yes. How do you buy? Have you ever worn any?
No,
Jil Sander?
no, but I remember when I was at college, Jil Sander, Helmut Lang, all those people were really informative in terms of how we dressed and that whole minimalist aesthetic. So, you know, I can see how it's a difficult collection to read, because as a consumer, you kind of think, well, actually, no, I don't really want to buy any of it, really, because it doesn't really feel like it's that pleasing or practical in a way.
No.
Well, what's the key? Can we just flick? Can you keep flicking through so everybody gets a cohesive?
Sort of overview.
Yeah, let's just see 50
Oh,
or 20
yes,
as we talk.
I mean, it's quite a cohesive collection, I think. You know,
What colour are those trousers? Red rust again.
well, they're sort of they look a more subtle orange than the orange we saw in London, which I thought was eye-searingly crude. It was ghastly, but.
That's the only accent of colour really in the show, isn't it? The trousers coming through.
No,
Everything else is quite dark.
well, no, she's just in an electric blue suit, just a few before.
But then again, traditionally, over a longer period of time, Jil Sander menswear was about grey, white,
Grey, white
navy,
and beige.
black.
Yeah.
Why suddenly you feel an accent of colour is interesting now?
No.
Well, that's something that Raf introduced.
Can we
wasn't
go
it?
back
Those
to those
solid
bright
blocks of
colours?
colour, like bright yellow or.
Yeah.
or
Well, again, why?
What do we think this is made of? No, I want...
Another
That one.
that sleeveless, super long jerkin.
What is that? Is that sort of some shirred fur?
It looks
or
like pony
mole
skin,
skin or pony
It could be.
pony skin.
Yeah,
That really is just absolutely not Jil Sander.
that's
to
just
me.
a showpiece,
It's
really,
final
isn't it?
piece,
It's just
yeah.
to have impact
Yes.
right at the end.
Yes.
But the wrong impact.
But it's a sad thing
Yeah, it
to
finishes
end
on the
on.
wrong note, really, doesn't it?
It's a
Yeah.
sad thing to end on, because that's the thing people go out with, the last thing.
And
they
again,
saw,
sleeveless.
you know.
She must really be saying that this sleeveless look is the cohesive part of the collection, because that's really been strong in this.
Well, she's not alone, of course, as we said. J.W. Anson was sleeveless. We've seen a lot of sleevelesses. Can we just quickly whip back through them? And anyone can yell and say, I've got something to say about that.
Well, I just wanted to say overall, now I've seen it, from a design point of view, it's actually not that minimal as well, this collection.
No,
not in the truest sense.
No.
No, it's these super extended shapes which Raf started experimenting with. There's still a bit of that in there. So it's almost as if she hasn't discarded that altogether, is she? She's trying to keep some cohesive message, because to break away again from what's being done. What does this cross signify, for example?
It'd be interesting to find out if...
I think it signifies I can do it, therefore I will.
And what does that mean, do you think?
Doesn't mean anything.
But it could still be the same...
That's a good comment.
It could be the same
actually,
design
I think
team
it could be just a
going
little
through.
bit like they're picking up an accent of the check that we've seen in some of those coats, and then they've taken it through to the knitwear as just a abstracted detail. A little bit like...
But why? For a theme as a graphic pattern? Why the cross? Are they saying no? Are they angry about something?
I don't think it's as...
No.
Well, I mean, I'm just...
Oh no,
putting my
you're
design head on.
over-intellectualising there.
I don't think it's as literal as that. I think
Really
when
do.
they were looking at that line-up and looking at the sketches, they probably injected that into the knitwear just to pick up on that check that we've seen on the coat, possibly.
I find this little jacket very worrying.
Yeah, I'm not sure about
I
these
don't
collars
like it
either.
at all. You're not sure of what?
The larger collar.
Yes.
Yeah.
What we're really saying,
What's that? Is
gentlemen,
that checkers?
I was
is
just looking at the sleeves on that.
Is this relevant? I mean, let's leave the colour palette and let's leave the shapes. Let's talk about the mood of the show, because I can see the windows there at the back and you can almost see out to the street, and they probably have they considered the set and where the camera would be shooting? Because that's really disjointed for me.
yes, I agree.
Because she's thinking about her aesthetic, and it's a total concept, and the backgrounds and all the layers are usually there. But if you look at those shots, it's almost like an afterthought where they've set the camera up.
It is, isn't it?
You've got the stairs, you've got the background.
It's
they
quite a
cast the
busy,
background.
cluttered.
Yeah,
kind of
she should be
background, isn't it?
absolutely pure
Yeah.
and clean.
And if she's tired of that, perhaps, Colin, which is why, or I don't know, maybe there's more, we can't see the show, we don't know this, you get a very restricted camera angle, but you can't see the context of what's going on elsewhere, but it's so disjointed.
You're absolutely
I
right.
wouldn't be pleased with those shots in my lookbook as a designer. It's just too much going on.
What sort of music do you think she would think would be suitable for these clothes? Or you would even think? Tom, what would you play? if you
What, to
were-
this?
To this, yeah.
I'm not
Deathly silent.
Yeah, exactly.
It might well be silent,
Yeah.
You
Again,
never
I was
know
talking
with
about
lady.
this look with Hywel earlier on. This reminds me of Dree's circular mid-90s.
Yeah.
High wrap, double-breasted,
Right.
short jacket. Again, as we were saying off camera beforehand, menswear is about a few endlessly tweaked elements every single season, and Jill must be up to what, 20 or 30 seasons? 15 years of menswear, Jack, you said?
Yeah.
So 30 collections already.
This
I
is
mean-
a question I'd like you to address, actually. You've brought up a very important point, I think. Is there such a thing as men's fashion? Fashion being something which changes radically season by season, or has one gimmick that in women's fashion usually everyone is prepared to, a lot of people are prepared to buy into. Is that something, you are a retailer, Jack, and you used to be on the design side. Do you think that this is something which,
Well, I think
are we misnaming it?
menswear takes such a much longer time to evolve, and it's all about the subtleties, isn't it? So the silhouettes never really change, and but what is interesting with what's happening in menswear is how much more colour and print I think is coming in, how men are not afraid to wear that now, whereas they might have once been. Particularly just going back to what we were talking about earlier, the Jonathan Saunders show, if you look at his silhouette, how wearable that is, and it's not really changed from anything else, but the way he's colour blocked and the colours that he's used, are quite adventurous. But men, I think, will wear those colours now and want to, and this is interesting in the show as well, how she has these injections of colour, whereas you were saying previously, Jill, it was all black, grey, white. But now I think men will wear these colours in these classic shapes.
How do you think there are enough men who will do that? I mean, we're talking about men, very definitely urban men, and in the creative sphere probably. Obviously London, where else? Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Edinburgh, if we're just thinking of this country. Is that enough?
I don't think it is. I think the majority of the consumers that can afford designer collections will wear black, navy, white, grey.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Is
I
this
really
because
do.
men are hopelessly unadventurous?
I just think that men buy differently to women. Men aren't so influenced by trend, don't feel the necessity to buy new product every season and new trends. They just want a wardrobe that they can have for 10 years, 15 years, and they'll buy different
the other-
things.
Especially as
Yeah.
you get older. I mean,
Yeah.
the point about colour, Jack, as well. I think coming out of the 60s and into the 70s, and Colin can talk about this as well, colour was everywhere because designers were experimenting. And then there was a period of, you got the Japanese designers coming in, Kom, Yoji, Issey Miyake, and then it was about minimalism and shading everything down and deconstructed. So the colours again became very, very muted and everything got more serious. And now, these last maybe 7 or 8 years, some designers, menswear designers have started to experiment again, possibly because of the pressures of having to appeal to the press, as we were discussing earlier, to be noticed as a collection.
Pictures.
Yeah,
yes.
exactly. And the second point, again, the question that you asked earlier, Colin, about fashion and style, you're into fashion when you're younger. As you get older, you make a conscious decision to be stylish, because that fashion word, perhaps for some men, is a little bit embarrassing because it's a little bit more whimsical, where you want to be seen more serious.
Well, there is the old joke of the wife saying to her husband, you must buy a new shirt, the collar's gone. And him saying, oh, you buy it, I want exactly the same blue, I want exactly the same collar. And I think that's very true. Because actually, as you get older, you've got other more interesting things to think about than the cut of a collar or whatever. You know, you decide what your look is, and then you look at all these things. And I think, you know, if I were young, I'd love to go out in a flame red suit, but I don't know where I would go.
But very few places. You'd have to live
You
in
know,
London.
this is so are we saying it's all a huge fraud, a facade that means nothing? What they actually are selling, most of, is underwear, Calvin Klein, for example, you know?
Well, in the context of menswear and designers,
Yes.
well, these big brands like Jil, I don't know the size of the business, but I would imagine 200-300 million, something
I
of
would
that
have
nature.
thought,
Does anybody-
yes.
yeah,
I don't know, but I would have thought.
You
yes,
have those big designers
Big,
that obviously
yes.
have become commercial, they've done 20 or 30 seasons. Let's be honest and say perhaps the inspiration isn't there anymore and they're just going through the motions. I'm not going to
Let's
list
not
many
say
of
that
them.
about Jill. That would
I wasn't
stress.
suggesting it was Jill. I'm
No.
just saying that perhaps there are some that think about business, especially, well, we can talk about, this is Milan Fashion Week, as you mentioned earlier, Colin, about the Italian brands being very business savvy. And they wouldn't get to the scale that they have done if they weren't. But it is a business, and that's what you need to consider first.
Sure. I think one of the problems, this is very true, I think, of the Italians, is they are loving the international life. You know, there is only so much time you can give to designing if you're spending time with the models, etc., on your yacht. You're going to every red carpet event that ever happens in New York or LA, you know, and you're building yet another house or buying yet another chateau or whatever. You know, it all becomes a little push.
A time
the
issue.
actual design thing becomes a little boring for them. It's much more fun to go and buy beautiful furniture for a fabulous villa we've just built or whatever.
They become a bit more like an editor, really, though, don't they? Because they're
Yes,
not really
that's
doing
a very
any
good
designing.
point,
They
I
have
think.
a vast young design. I mean,
so.
I've been on those design teams where they get people straight from St Martin's in and then join a established design team, and then they come in and they just edit, or they'll completely see something and just hate it and scrap the whole thing until they go back to the drawing board.
Right.
But really, it's coming from somewhere else. It's got, especially the Jil team. I mean, like in Milan, the design teams that are there, all the, I'm not saying that they're all British, but a lot are, and they all, everybody knows each other. So whether you're, you know, at Armani or you're at Jil, they all hang out together. So I mean, I don't know if they're still there, but I knew people that were at Jil, and they were all really young, you know, very young.
And that explains why many of the collections are so generic. They're all mixing together, they're all doing the same thing. I remember thinking 7 or 8 years ago I could take 5 or 6 designer collections, take all the labels out, mix them all up into a table, and you could just
Who
put
would
the
know?
label back in.
Because there is
Make
a
it
general
more
kind of zeitgeist
no
that
credibility as
everyone
well.
picks up on.
Yes.
So if you are all of a similar age and socialised together, and everything, not that you're all talking about the work that's going on elsewhere, but there's just a feeling that you all have and you're all similar,
Yeah.
so it does tend to spread.
I tend to think, I'd like your view on this, Tom, I tend to think that the fashion show is just the first tentative statement. I believe that fashion is made now by the photographer and the stylist and the art editor. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you're right, because I think that there's such a limited audience, I think, that do actually actually sit down and look at the show, or look at the like we are now, the stills from the show. So in fact, for the most part, the exposure of that collection is through editorial, isn't it, or through other means. It's certainly not through the show. As you say, it's very much the starting point.
And I mean, let's be honest. I mean, every time I go into my newsagent, there's a new magazine, a new fashion and style, whatever magazine, and they're very exciting. The pages are often silly, but very exciting, and you tend to remember the mise-en-scène and not the actual garment, what you can see of it even. But do you think that there is a sort of shift away from this idea that what the designer said, you know, when Balenciaga made something, or Dior made something, or Jacques Fat, or whoever it happened to be, that was it. That was the way it was photographed. Now, and I remember the terrific rows there used to be when I worked in Italy in fashion. If a jacket from designer X was put with a skirt by designer Y in a magazine. Now it's all making a statement about the sort of life, the sort of person that you wish to be by buying these clothes.
Well, the teams I think it's important to say that the team surrounding the creative person, whether you call him a creative director, a designer, whatever you want to call him, artistic director, is much bigger now. I remember when the term stylist started to become a reality as a word, because it didn't used to be a job in the late 80s. I think it was probably somebody like Ray Petrie who was the first serious stylist. So prior to that, menswear designers designed collections. They knew exactly who their audience was. They knew how to photograph it. They had the total picture in their minds. Because of whatever reason, needing more assistance, needing a different perspective, or because the business just got bigger, stylists came in, more design assistants, artistic directors, more creative directors, and the teams just become wider. I think, for me, and if I take myself out of the equation being a designer, because most things I wear I've designed myself, I need to feel the designer's hand in the item or the brand to make it authentic. If I don't, it doesn't make any sense to me. And that's just not fashion, it's everything. Car design, architecture, product design. If I can't see that, it doesn't make any sense to me. And the bigger the brand gets, obviously the designer's hand gets further and further away. And I think this is the problem.
Absolutely.
It's completely diluted. I think this is the biggest problem with these big brands. Personally, I mean, I would cringe at the fact of having one of my designs in 1,000 stores all over the world. It's exactly the same design, exactly the same colour, and everybody can buy the same thing. Who wants that? The spirit of individuality is something that's strongly associated to London and English creativity.
What car do you drive?
Well, I have many different. I've had different things over the years, and I will change depending on what I do. But I will have a utility vehicle, or I'll have a sports vehicle, or I'll have a Vespa or a bicycle, or I'll walk. It depends on the occasion, which is how I view fashion. I'm doing this event, or I'm doing this event, or I'm going for a walk.
What I'm saying, Carlo, is I think that I think it's very difficult to personalise or individualise things that are mass-produced, whether it's a television set, whether it's a car, whether it's furniture. You know,
but you can put your stamp on it through your choice.
So really, I'm surprised that you as a designer say you'd be upset if your clothes were the same everywhere all over the world.
No, saturation, because the spirit of individuality is more important. It's getting back to the character that wears the clothes, not the clothes dictating who the character is.
Right.
That will repeat itself in every decade. It has done from time immemorial.
If that's the case, is there any sense at all in designers showing clothes on very young models when, as you've said already, Jack, young people can't afford them, or maybe they can now, I don't know.
But
what's the demographic of menswear buying in itself?
Well, young students would go to thrift stores.
Let's hear what
we buy second-hand things.
Let's hear what
obviously we
Jack
have.
has
It's so vast. We have so many different departments. But within what we see over Fashion Week, we have men's designer room, and really that client that we're seeing tends to be it's kind of 20 to 30, really 20 to 35.
Right.
Who knows who's interested in these brands and the younger brands as well, and they'll get an investment piece possibly. They're not going to do a huge shop and buy across the collection, but they'll come in and they'll buy a piece.
Okay, now we're getting towards the end of our time, but let's think a little bit about where we feel Italian fashion is. And I think we should start with you, Carlo, because you're an Italian and you're a designer. Is it in the doldrums, as so many people say, or is this evil propaganda from people who want to take over?
No, it's nonsense. I think if you take a perspective on what Italy does as a country and the culture and all forms of design, it is essentially rooted in a classic outlook. The Italian male and female is essentially very classic across all walks of life. And that's essentially what they'll do. They'll just build those layers. They'll embellish it, and maybe it'll be this for one season or this for another season. But there'll be a fundamental integrity based on something classic, which they will always have. And
that's the bella figura thing, isn't it?
Yes, but also, I mean, these brands like Armani, Gucci, they've been around for a long time, and you need to ask yourself why. Yes, the business is savvy, but also fundamentally what they always do is they build on a classic tradition with some provenance and proper heritage. So Armani always linking himself to blue. It's probably the most widely worn colour for man over the last 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years. So there is credibility in the thinking to begin with. So no, I think it's exactly the same. Perhaps it's not as inventive as it was 12, 13, 14 years ago, and it's just levelled itself out a little bit more. But they are standard classics that will always be there. You know exactly what you're going to get from Armani, you know what you're going to get from Gucci. It will dip in and out of fashion as the seasons come and go, depending on what's going on. But they are there, and they're super powerful.
Do you think that the designers are perhaps too old, Hal?
In terms of Italian designers?
We're talking about, yes, Italians.
No,
yes.
not at all. I think agreeing with what Carlo says, you know, I think what you have to respect about the Italian, it's an industry, it's a business, and you have to respect that these brands have been going for a long time, and you know, you have to recognise that that's an amazing thing where so many designers, you know, just don't last and can't continue and sell clothes. But I think when you talk about designers being too old, I think we have to remember, you know, like we talked about before, it's about design teams. So,
yes.
You know, there is the expectation that there is lots of people working with the designers.
But I've met an awful lot of designers, and a lot of awful designers, I might say, over the years. And they're not just going to say to a design team, get on with it. You know, they have egos as big as a house, or even as big as a cathedral, you know, and I think you would agree with that.
It's interesting you link religion to it, Colin, but I think that's a subject for another day.
Well, in a sense,
very poignant to the Italian designer.
Appearance is a religion in Italy.
Well, the brands are like religions. We have our temples,
Devotees,
we have our key figures.
Your devotees,
Absolutely.
The ones who worship at the shrine. It's rather an interesting point, isn't it, if you think about it?
Well, the Roman Catholicism and the cross is probably the best logo that was ever produced, in my opinion.
I think what we go to, what you know, Italian fashion is about is reliability and familiarity. I think that's what it is, and that's, you know, nice to have that across any industry. The newness and the new is always fantastic, and that is what London is known for. But I think, you know, we look to Italy for a different level. It's a completely different level. And like within, you know,
of
retail,
quality,
within retail, you see those brands often grouped together because a certain type of customer feels that they can trust those brands. You know,
certainly the quality of Italian goods has always been exceedingly high, whether it's a Lamborghini or whether it's an absolutely beautiful piece of luggage from Gucci or whatever. And I think that still remains.
Again, but that's a cultural, that's been born out of a society and a type of person that cares about what they do. And this is a point about culture, which is again is a really big discussion, probably not for today. So regardless of what you do, whether you're a bread maker or you're making clothes in a factory, you care about what you do.
You take pride.
Absolutely.
We're almost at the end. I'm going to tell you a little story which is true. Years ago, I was with another journalist in Italy, an English journalist who has now become quite prominent, and we were being shown some very beautiful clothes by an incredibly sophisticated Italian PR. And at one point, this journalist who was with me, said, "And how much would that silk blouse be?" And the Italian PR said a certain price. And the shock on this woman's face was extraordinary. She said, "An English woman would never pay that. That's the price of a refrigerator." And the woman who was the PR, the Italian, and she summed Italy up completely. She said, "Oh, in this country, the woman would have the refrigerator and the blouse." Says everything. Anyhow, thank you very, very much indeed, gentlemen, for making this a lively and exciting discussion. We leave Jil Sander, and I suppose we can say we're not so terribly happy about it, but we aren't sort of damning it completely, and we'll be joining you, or you'll be joining us, I hope, for more coverage of Italy in the next couple of days. Thank you so much, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.